I'm Shachar Azani, and welcome to this JBS Israel Election Special, coming to you all the way from Jerusalem in Israel, right here at the Jerusalem Press Club. Co-hosting this panel with me is Talia Dekel-Fleissig. Talia is the Vice President of the Jerusalem Press Club.
Thank you so much, Shachar. This is really exciting, and welcome to everybody to the Jerusalem Press Club at the Torah restaurant. As you can see, we're in the beautiful view of the Old City. By the way, this neighborhood was the first neighborhood built outside of the Old City walls in 1860. Joining us today is Sara Haetzni Cohen. She is the Chairwoman of Sheli, a Zionist NGO, mostly active online, and she writes a column in the leading Israeli newspaper, Israel Hayom. Thank you so much for joining us, Sara.
Thank you for having me.
And we also have with us Shmuel Rosner, who's a senior fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute, also here in Jerusalem. He's also an analyst for Kan TV, which is Israel's public broadcaster. You're also the founder and editor of the data journalism initiative, themamad.com, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about that afterwards. And also write a weekly column for the Jewish Journal and for Ma'ariv in Israel. So thank you for joining us.
All true. All true. So we can begin?
Yes, let's begin. So I think maybe the first question is how everyone is feeling this morning. Let's start with Sara.
I'm relieved. I was very anxious about these elections. I was very tired also because we're in this circle of elections all over again, and I was very upset with the current or former government, and I was very afraid that the right-wing Israeli public are tired and sarcastic and and they don't really feel like going and voting. And I was surprised and relieved because of two things. First of all, we have enough seats for having a stable government. So hopefully we won't go to vote again in the next, couple of months. And second, because I feel that there are a lot of troubles and a lot of policies that needs to be changed, and I hope that the coming Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will be clever enough to lead and change these policy issues.
Okay, so I do want to make clear that we're taping this a little bit earlier than the results. The final results have been published. At the moment, we're looking now, less than 90% of the votes have been
think 97, but still they need to count the, I don't know, how do you call it, matafot?
The Sarah's referring to the votes given by people who
are overseas, soldiers, prisoners, etc. They count their
in homes. Yes, people who have COVID. But we're actually talking about around 400,000 votes.
Which could really change the picture.
It's about 10 mandates, so this could, mean everything. But I think it's safe to say that those votes will probably not go to the Arab parties. So
I don't know. There was one of the last elections that it did help to Balad because of the prisoners' votes or something like this. So I don't know. I'm still hoping that we'll have enough mandates and enough seats to have a stable coalition.
Shmuel, what are your thoughts this morning?
Well, I'm of two minds. On the one hand, I agree with Sarah that it's good to have a resolution to our never-ending cycle of constant elections. Having the fifth election cycle in 4.5 years was not a healthy thing for Israel, and I think having a government, maybe any government, would be preferable to having yet another cycle of elections. Having said that, the government that is expected to form is probably going to be the most radical right-wing government in Israel's history, which doesn't mean it's bad. It means that it's different. It's different than what we know, and there are many things we don't yet understand about this government. It's government in which the Likud party will be the most leftist member of the coalition. The Haredi parties, the ultra-Orthodox parties, are currently expected to have 20 seats. Again, we are taping before we know the exact final results, so maybe it will not be 20, but rather 17, but they're going to have a lot of power. And right-wing religious coalition, Tzionut Hadatit, is also gaining power and is going to have a voice in this government. So this is probably the most religious right-wing government in Israel's history. This means something. First and foremost, it means that many Israelis feel alienated from this government, and they should also be taken into account. Half the country didn't vote for this government, and they are afraid. And I think their fear should be addressed in some way by the incoming government.
I just want to point out that last night Netanyahu made in his victory speech some remarks that were unfamiliar to us and went more along the lines of what they call in Hebrew mamlachtiyut.
Conciliatory and moderate comments. I thought he was doing the right thing. He wants to be the prime minister for everybody. He wants to have a stable government. And Netanyahu, with all his flaws and advantages, does see himself as an important leader of Israel and the Jewish people. He doesn't want to end his career in failure or to end his career as someone who, so to speak, ruined Israel. So I think it's important for him to keep in perspective the fact that he's going to be the prime minister, not just of a very right-wing government, but also of the entirety of Israel.
I just want to take that point and ask you, the elections, the processes, the fifth round are absolute reflection of a great divide within the Israeli public. So do you see a path to a solution of that fracture? We all remember the tribe speech by President Rivlin. We have a certain reality that we've all been facing. You just indicated the fears. Are you see this as a beginning of a solution or a deepening of the problem?
Well, I think that there is some misunderstanding concerning the actual divisions in Israel. I don't think the views of most Israelis are that different. To go back to a famous quote, I think it is usually attributed to President Woodrow Wilson, talking about the differences between politics in academia versus national politics. And he said something along the lines that politics in academia is so vicious because the stakes are so low. In Israel, we might say that the politics of Israel is so vicious because the differences in opinion are not that great. If you take a person such as Netanyahu and a person such as Yair Lapid, the head of the main opposition party, well, he is now the prime minister, but he is supposed to become the head of the opposition party. Their views on many of the main issues are not that different, neither on the economy, nor on the Israeli-Palestinian issue, nor on the many of the other things that we might consider of some importance. A lot of it is a matter of tone, rhetoric, and the ability of Netanyahu to communicate with publics and sectors that Lapid cannot communicate with. So it's more a matter of identity politics than it is about actual policies and views. But Sarah might disagree.
Okay, so I don't think that if you look at the numbers, if you look deep into the numbers, you won't find a different, you won't find a lot of change, a lot of different from the last elections and all the circle of elections we had. Numbers are quite the same. The thing was how you manage your partners. How do you push them to do the right thing? How do you do the right thing? And Netanyahu, he did it well with the party of the Tzionut Hadatit when he pushed them
religious Zionists, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich.
Right. And he pushed them and to unite, a lot of sectors within their base and he did it when he smartly did different agreements between parties. He did it with the Haredi, with the ultra-Orthodox. He went to Bnei Brak, he went there to their cities to encourage them to vote. They won't vote for him. They're voting for their parties, but he knew that his future, his success is depends on them. So he did it very smartly, and the numbers are quite the same. So I don't exactly agree with the Israeli society's how does
fractured.
It's fractured. I don't think. I just think that we need a government.
Israeli society, according to you, is not fractured, but Israel Sheli made a huge effort in the events of May 2021 to talk about, to raise the issue of one certain population, which is the Israeli citizens of Israel, and everything that was going on with that. So, given the government that might be ahead of us, how do you think it will deal with certain events in the future, similar events?
So that's the point. So if you ask me why so many people voted for Itamar Ben-Gvir, it's not because they hate Arabs, it's because they're afraid. So the issue with these elections and the big, voting for the Tzionut Hadatit, religious Zionism, the party of Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, is standing right there in May 2021 in the pogroms in Akko, in Lod, in Jerusalem, when Arab neighbors put a sign on Jewish cars and Jewish apartments in order for their friends to burn it. So that, and it didn't disappear. The self-security, that's how you say it, I don't know. I'm afraid there are streets in Jerusalem.
The feeling of security.
The feeling of security, the feeling of the individual. I'm afraid to go in in some streets of Jerusalem. Of course, I'm not entering some neighborhoods in Jerusalem, the city where I live. I live in Jerusalem, and it never was. It never was like a heaven. But since May 2021, we feel less secure, and people are afraid, and people want that someone will take care of these problems. And this is one of the missions of the new government, will be to strengthen the police, to give answers to this radicalization within the Arab population. And yes, to bring the security back to the streets of Israel.
You mentioned fear. I want to take it to you, Shmuel. We have a new player who played on the margin of Israeli politics up until now, Itamar Ben-Gvir, part of the religious Zionist party, and now he's making his debut as a central player in this upcoming coalition. How do you see the reactions in the Jewish world outside of Israel from different Jewish communities? I believe it was the Jewish Weekly in London that came out with a big story about Ben-Gvir not being welcome with the politics of hate, etc. How do you see those reactions and the future of the relationship of this government with Jewish communities outside of Israel?
Look, the reaction is going to be one of shock and dismay. There's no doubt about it. Many people are afraid of Ben-Gvir. Many people see him as an illegitimate player in politics, as someone who's racist or fascist or whatever names they want to call him. I tend to agree with Sara. Ben-Gvir is a messenger in these elections. He was not picked by the voters because of the whole package that he proposes. I don't think many of his voters are even aware of his views on Jewish halachic law or on the Third Temple or many of the other issues that he promotes. They voted for him because he was smart enough to identify the one sore point that is the point on which people are going to vote. In every election, there is the tactic and there is the strategic. You know, the tactics is whether you have a cohesive type of political bloc and whether you organize the different parties in a certain order that they don't fall below the electoral threshold, and whether you handle the campaign in a proper way. All these are important things and they contribute much to a victory. But above these things, there is the strategy, and I agree that the most important event for this election is the events from a year ago in May 2021, in which mostly Arab Israelis rioted around Israel and pushed Israelis into feeling that law, order, and security from within Israel, this is not the Palestinian problem of, you know, beyond the green line. This is the Palestinian issue within Israel. It's much more threatening. It's much more dramatic. And Israelis were voting for Ben Gvir because they wanted to send a message to the government: you must deal with this problem first, and all other things can wait.
I just want to push a little bit on this issue. Sure. I spoke last night with a young student who is one of the prominent pro-Israel leaders on his Ivy League campus. And he told me quite explicitly that and I understand the considerations you mentioned, but the mere presence of someone like Itamar Ben Gvir, with all of his problematic history and announcements, and will make his mission to stand up for Israel much more difficult, not just towards the outside, he told me, but even internally as a person. He's having difficulties realizing that Israel, as he said, is promoting such politics of hate. How do you see such statements?
Well, I agree that it's going to complicate the lives of people who try to promote Israel outside of Israel. It's going to make life difficult for people who fight delegitimization of Israel and of people who must fight anti-Semitism and other things. No doubt, Itamar Ben Gvir is a complication for Israel, and yet voters in Netivot or Eilat or Bat Yam, they don't think about these missionaries who must work in foreign campuses. They think about their own security. And when they fear that Arab Israelis are going to riot again, or when they see that many Arab Israelis have guns, illegal weapons in their homes that they can use freely without the police entering their neighborhoods and confiscating these weapons, they will vote with their guts and with their fears, and not with some distant consideration of Israel's image abroad. And this is what happened.
Let's add another element into the potential damage to Israel's image abroad. Could we be looking at annexation back on the table as a result of this government, or a declaration of sovereignty, however?
Look, for whatever government, governments tend to step in having promised to do many things. If they are lucky, they achieve 10% of what they vote to do. The margin of the room of maneuver that any government has is quite limited. There is reality, there is the world, the international community, internal pressures, coalition considerations, politics. There are many priorities, budgetary limitations. So talking about annexation now, I don't think it's in the cards. I don't think it's on the table. I think this is just an attempt to make trouble. This Israeli government, the entering Israeli government will have enough of its plate before considering annexation. I don't think this is something that we should expect in the coming years.
I would like to refer to that because I totally agree. I mean, I'm for I call it sovereignty, but I'm for it. I stood for it, and I'm talking about it in every, ever since I remember myself. But there are a lot of things to do in Judea and Samaria before you declare sovereignty. there are a lot of things to do about law and order, about security, about the Palestinian Authority who funds, who pays salaries to murderers. There are a lot of tools in the box of the upcoming government that it can use before going into these corners of big declarations of sovereignty. And if you talk about sovereignty, if you talk about law and order, so it refers also to what's happening within the green line, whatever what you just said, which is what it was precisely. I mean, exactly the motivation of people why they went out and voted to this specific party, there are a lot of things to do before you go into these corners of international, puzzle of.
Well, but I must ask you this. You're speaking about this with such passion and importance, and you represent that ideology. And the incoming prime minister, the almost eternal prime minister, has been steps away from declaring annexation or sovereignty just a couple of years ago. You have the opportunity now. You have a right-wing government.
No, we don't.
Aren't you? Don't you think that this is the time to do it now?
That we don't have the opportunity. The opportunity was when you had a different presidency, a different government in the U.S. You don't have quite the opposite.
So the international terms.
Quite the opposite.
But as a right-wing government, you don't see this as a ripe opportunity to.
There is no opportunity. This opportunity is dead, for now. I don't know what will happen in the future, what will happen in the elections overseas in the U.S. But this opportunity for now is dead. And I'm saying that instead of fighting this theoretical fight, there are a lot of tools and a lot of things to do, a lot of steps to take tomorrow morning in Judea and Samaria that this government must take.
Shacha, I would love to keep hearing from everybody, but unfortunately, we're out of time. What I will say...
One more. I just have to put this one in. You were talking about the inner divisions of the Israeli public. 20% of Israelis are Arabs. The last year has been dubbed as the experiment, the idea that Arabs could participate in the government. Mansour Abbas, who was part of the coalition for the first time. Do you see the results, or what seems to be the quite conclusive results of this election, as a slap in the face to Abbas and his idea of participatory politics from within the Arab parties? Is something that may hamper us in the future, in the hope, because at the end of the day, you'd like to encourage such participation, and we don't see it happening now, especially with the religious Zionists as part of the coalition. So how do you see that reality vis-a-vis Israel's Arab citizens?
I'm not an expert in the Arab society, but from my point of view, Ra'am, the party of Mansour Abbas, got the same, even more seats than it had. So I'm not quite sure that from their position, what you just described it came to a dead end. But I do think that a government in Israel cannot trust only Ra'am. We can't
can't lean on them.
We can't lean. Thank you. We can't lean only on them. They can be partners in some civil issues. It's very important in terms of the violence within the Arab society, which is horrible. Economical things, but we can't lean on them. We can't, because we have different dimensions that. To lean on them will be a big threat to this country.
I'd say that reality is never as clear-cut as we would like it to be. And in the last year, we saw two conflicting dynamics. We saw, for the first time, participation of an Arab party in the coalition, and this was a positive move and an encouraging move in many ways. And on the other hand, we also saw the riots that we also mentioned. And you must take these two things into account together. The Israeli public got confused. What do the Arab parties want? What do Arab Israelis want? Do they want to riot, or do they want participation, integration? Until there is a clear answer from Arab voters and Arab leaders on these questions, Jewish Israelis will be apprehensive to go the extra mile and let Arab movements participate in making the most important decisions concerning Israeli policies.
All very important points, and if anybody out there listening wants to continue the conversation with Shmuel Rosner or Sara Haetzni Cohen, you're welcome to reach out to the Jerusalem Press Club for more valuable insight.
Thank you so much for your time and insights and wisdom. This is definitely a fascinating morning in Israel, but it seems that almost every morning in Israel seems to have some fascination in it.
Definitely.